Um, so this is a follow-up video to my open letter to the Open Medicine Foundation. Since a lot of people have given me specific criticisms to respond to um, about why I believe environmental research should be prioritized and mold, etc., um, I will like to respond to those in like a point by point way, but I want to kind of start at the beginning um, because I feel like I've been preaching to the choir a little bit. Like everyone in the mold avoidance world, like who's doing this and out here on a limb, doing this difficult lifestyle, which is better than being sick, but sometimes still can be very hard and sometimes awful in its own way. Everyone in that world will agree with me, but that's not who I'm trying to convince. So I think a little bit of history is in order um, regarding mold and CFS. And again, a disclaimer, when I use mold, I really think we ought to rewind and just study what is in the environment. Mold is a useful shorthand term for us to use when we're talking to each other as patients and trying to figure out what we react to, but it's not necessarily exactly, we can't know until we study what exactly we're reacting to in the environment. But here's a history as to why the environmental component is a known part of this illness, as much as it can be without having been researched, and why this is more than an n=1 anecdote about some kind of miracle cure. In 1985, I believe, um, in Incline Village and Truckee, California and Nevada, respectively, in Lake Tahoe, there were there was this terrible sort of flu outbreak, only in a very large percentage of patients, it turned into something worse than a flu. It created lasting illness, and it people were chronically fatigued, but more than fatigued, they had problem of recovery to exertion, and they had like really intense cognitive difficulties, and these local doctors, Paul Cheney and Dan Peterson, were just family medicine doctors there, were just kind of overwhelmed with this influx of patients that just weren't getting better and had these disturbing symptoms. And they ran lots of tests, but they called in the CDC to respond. And the CDC response was basically kind of a joke, was just totally negligible and inadequate. The CDC came, ran very few labs, spoke to some of the patients, and then left. And they basically concluded in so many words that the outbreak was a manifestation of mass hysteria.
For the most part, certainly compatible with a viral illness, and we felt that it would soon go away, as most viruses do.
But Dr. Cheney was soon puzzled. The symptoms did not go away, and they began to look more and more like the infectious mononucleosis seen in teenagers.
We were unaware that you could have an outbreak of mononucleosis in adults. We were under the impression, and all the literature that we had available to us would indicate that this is a disease that is isolated.
As time passed, the number of patients with these symptoms grew, and there were clusters of outbreaks. A group of teachers at a high school. Another group at a local casino hotel.
To see this many people coming in whom we knew in accelerating numbers through the early spring with a chronic fatigue syndrome and associated other findings, that we then began to be alarmed.
In fact, medical researchers have described scores of outbreaks similar to the one in Lake Tahoe. There have also been scores of explanations ranging from pesticides to mass hysteria to various infectious causes.
I may have even understated the case of how severe that outbreak was a little. Doctors Cheney and Peterson would not have called the CDC for a few cases of idiopathic chronic fatigue. This was a debilitating illness that did not get better with time. It was similar in functional impairment and severity to other neurological illnesses such as MS, but maybe even worse. Many patients were bedridden. Erik Johnson, who I'm going to speak about more in detail later, describes barely being able to crawl to the bathroom during the worst part of his illness. And the symptoms were beyond fatigue, post-exertional increase in symptoms, total exhaustion, flu-like symptoms. There were neurological signs that were off, and Cheney and Peterson found abnormalities on MRIs, like brain lesions, and found abnormalities in the blood. And yet, none of this was enough to convince the CDC that this was a serious syndrome and to do further research.